us mere mortals who aren't running $300 million companies, we need a framework too. And so your framework does not have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have a cool name, right? The main thing your framework needs to be is clear.
You're listening to the 7-Figure Leap podcast. We're here to leverage rich relationships and smart strategies to take your business to the next level. Here's your host, Dustin Riekman.
If you're a coach or a consultant or even an agency owner, you need a signature framework. Welcome back to the 7-Figure Leap podcast. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, I'm going to do everything I can to be super descriptive today, but you might want to take a peek over on YouTube because I'm actually going to share some slides and go through some visuals today to aid in why you need a signature framework and exactly how to create one. And I have lots of examples here. So the visuals are optional, but might be really useful to you. So I was recently hosting a intensive day-long workshop on how to create, launch and optimize and eventually scale a group coaching offer. And so there were, a lot of things that we covered in this workshop, but I'd say the central thing, and by far the thing that we got the most feedback on, was this idea of a signature framework. So I'm going to go into presentation mode here if you are on the video feed. And I just want to first and foremost talk about what I mean by a signature framework, why it's so important. So a framework, I think when I show you some examples, you're going to be like, oh, now I see what you're talking about. Before I get into the specifics on the examples, though, I want to talk about why frameworks matter, right? So a framework is essentially naming and framing the process by which you provide transformation to your clients, right? So why is a framework important? Well, I don't think there's any better tool in your coaching tool belt to provide clarity to the audience and eventually to your clients, holding you as an authority. And it really allows you to provide consistent results. So one of the things we talked about in our workshop was, one-on-one coaching or one-on-one consulting, it can basically be a custom experience and you kind of meet people where they're at and you take them through a journey at a different pace and maybe with a different outcome. But when you want to have a productized service or a group coaching program, you got to have consistency, right? And so you want people to be able to follow a consistent process. And so the process is important, but when you package it up as a framework, it not only provides great structure for your group coaching or consulting or services delivery, but actually becomes intellectual property, which is really important, right? So now it's not just the thing you use to deliver results. It's also a go-to tool for marketing and for teaching. So, your framework can be used in lots of places, obviously group coaching like we do at the Podcast Profits Accelerator, but for consulting, for podcasting like this or podcast guesting, keynote, speeches from the stage, writing books, your social media content, creating lead magnets. That's the power of the framework, is that once you have this established, you own it, and it really can, and I think should become your number one business asset. It's really that important. So let's talk about some sample frameworks, just kind of drive this home, talk about the different types of frameworks so you can kind of see which one might fit best for you and your intellectual property. If you're a coach, there's one particular type of framework that I want to highlight and encourage you to use. So the first example I'll use is our own. So we run the Podcast Profits Accelerator. It's a 90-day program. It's a group coaching program. It's high ticket, high results. And we've been doing this for 3.5 years. We've had 240 clients at this point, 100% satisfaction rate, right? 18 consecutive sold out cohorts. Like, it works, right? It's pretty darn effective. And so if you've listened to this podcast, you've probably heard me talk about it. Or if you follow me on LinkedIn, or you're on our email newsletter, or you see me do guest training in other places, or host workshops, or speak from stages, this 5P framework is kind of like what I'm known for. And in fact, I'm currently writing a book on this very topic. That's the power of a framework. So our framework is pretty simple. It's 5 Ps, right? So purpose, plan, pitch, perform, profit. I won't go through and explain all those. We actually have an entire podcast episode if you're interested in applying that framework. But I really want to point out it is a framework, and this is a linear framework, right? So we start every client in step 1 and we progress them all the way over into step 5. So that's like a linear framework, and it's really the backbone of our entire 7-figure business. There are other types of frameworks. So one is a really good friend of mine, Tony DeLorenzo. He's an alumni of the Podcast Profits Accelerator also. He and his wife, Elisa, run a marriage business, a marriage coaching business. Their signature framework is these 6 pillars of intimacy. So they've written a best-selling book, and the book follows the 6 pillars of intimacy in a marriage, right? So they have different types of intimacy. So sexual intimacy, recreational intimacy, financial intimacy, emotional intimacy. There are 6. And so that's not a linear framework though, right? That is a sort of a typology framework. It's archetype framework. It's in their case, pointing out different aspects or pillars of the marriage that you might want to focus on. But that gives them a ton of authority and credibility, and it gives them a proven system to assess where people need the most help. So you can literally read their book, or you can go take an assessment on their website, and it will say, hey, based on what you've told us here, you should really address your financial intimacy. That is the pillar that needs the most help, and we can help you with that, with a program or with coaching, etc. Right? So that is a different type of framework, but it's still a framework. Another one you might be familiar with that's similar to that would be the 5 love languages, right? Or working genius, or the Kolbe assessment, or the Enneagram, right? Like, these aren't linear processes. They are ways to name, claim, and understand something about yourself. It's a really powerful framework. And it's one that's, led to a very successful business for them. Some more popular frameworks outside of, my inner circle here that might be familiar to you. One would be StoryBrand. So if you've read the book, Building a Story Brand with Donald Miller, or you've been to any keynotes or training, or like me, I've actually been certified in StoryBrand. So I'm a certified StoryBrand guide. The central thing that all of those things point to is the StoryBrand SB7 framework. People just call it the StoryBrand framework or the StoryBrand brand script, right? So it's 7 pieces of a story that you can map to your story and the transformation you provide your clients, so that you can create a compelling story out of your offer or your service, right? I'd say it's kind of a hybrid. It is linear in a sense, in that it always starts with step 1 and goes to step 7, but you don't know, you can really pick it up at any piece and hone in on different parts of it. It's not necessarily sequential, but it is a 7-step framework that has, been the cornerstone of a $15, $20 million business. One of my favorite frameworks that I feel is very pertinent to coaches and consultants is actually the Dave Ramsey, or Ramsey Solutions now, Baby Steps. So maybe you've heard of this. If not, it's really simple, which is part of its power, right? You can Google it, or if you're seeing the image on the video, you can see it for yourself. It's 7 steps also. These are the 7 sort of financial order of operations, or the financial steps that Dave Ramsey says you should follow when you want to become financially free, right? Have financial peace, in his words. So everyone starts on step 1. Then they progress to step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So their step 1 is saving $1,000 in your emergency fund. Then step 2 is paying off your consumer debt. Step 3 is saving a full emergency fund of 3 to 6 months expenses. Step 4 is investing 15% in retirement. Step 5 is saving for college. Step 6 is paying off your house. Step 7 is build wealth and give. So what's really powerful about this framework is that anyone can come to it and know where they're at and where to start. Right? So you might start on step 3 if you've already done the first 2, but most people, go through all 7, or they at least go through 2 through 7. And what's also interesting about it, and this is one of the things I want to point out about a framework, is the beginning and end points are the most important part. I'm going to talk here in a second about how to create your own framework, but this is a great example. Step 1 is a baby step, right? And not just because these are the baby steps, but step 1 is always a baby step. Step 1 is always kind of meeting people where they're at. It's often intended to give people clarity or build quick momentum, because that's where people start, right? And then step 7, in this case, or the last step in the framework, is always a little bit ethereal, I guess you could say, right? Like, you don't ever fully accomplish it. It's the end game, but the end game is in effect an infinite game. In this case, build wealth and give. Yeah, like, you're always going to do that, right? So it's sort of the evergreen step in the process. And if you worked with Ramsey and you got to baby step 7, you're going to stay there forever, right? Hopefully. Otherwise, you're going backwards in progress. The other thing about that is, if you worked with them over a specific period of time, you're probably not going to hit baby step 7, right? It's an aspirational goal. And that's really okay, right? So like, and I'm going to talk more about this in a second, but your last step in the framework does not have to be a endpoint. It often won't be an endpoint. It will be a aspirational place where people want to get to and continue to improve from. So anyway, the 7 baby steps, I feel like, is a really tangible, great framework. It is a linear framework, just like the 5 Ps. And if you go back to the 5 Ps as an example, just like the 7 baby steps, the first step, ours is purpose. It's getting really clear, right? So it's understanding why you want to use podcast guesting and who your target market is and what are the right words to attract them. That's very clarifying, and it gives people really fast momentum. Step 5, which is our last step, is profit, growing your business exponentially. That is something you want to continue to do, right? You're not like done with it when you get to it. You get there and you realize that like this is sort of the game that we want to play long term. And then there's steps in between that get you from step 1 to the last step, right? That is a linear framework. So those are some examples. I hope that you can see the power in that. If you look at like the Dave Ramsey 7 baby steps, this is the foundation of everything, right? So, and they have a $300 million company. So they write books, they have guest experts, they have a very popular podcast for 3 hours a day. All they do is answer questions, and almost every question is answered by referencing the 7 baby steps, right? They have Financial Peace University, which is basically their group coaching program that's held in local communities, local churches and stuff by other facilitators. But because they have a proven framework, it doesn't have to be Dave Ramsey who delivers this. They can have lots of people who are trained and empowered to deliver the framework. Just like StoryBrand, I can do StoryBrand for you because I've been trained in it. I don't have to have Donald Miller, because this framework is intellectual property that transcends the individual that created it. So hopefully this has given you an appreciation for just how powerful a framework is. And so us mere mortals who aren't running $300 million companies, we need a framework too. And so your framework does not have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have a cool name, right? The main thing your framework needs to be is clear, right? So you need a clear framework. And if you're a coach or consultant and you take people through a transformation, I would very strongly recommend you try to create a linear framework. So like mine, like the baby steps, right? Where people know where they start and they know where you're taking them. That's really great for structuring your coaching, whether that's one-on-one coaching or group coaching. If you have a framework that everyone goes through, it's really consistent and easy for people to understand where they're at in the process, how they're winning when they've completed a step, and how to get to the next one. So that brings us to, how do you build your framework? So the content for the framework really comes from your own lived experience or your own intellectual property. If you've been coaching or consulting for a while, or you've been doing agency services for a while, it's really as simple as looking back at the process that you use with your clients. And if, let's say, you're going to go from one-on-one to group coaching, it's a really good forcing function for this, because you need to decide at what point in the customer journey do I want to start working with them? And that defines the beginning, right? And where do I want to take them? That defines the end. The first and the last steps are by far the most important. So if you can get the first step and the last step of the framework, then you can fill in the steps in between sort of logically, right? Like, hey, I think it's going to take me 6 weeks to work with a client. Step 1, step 6, I got them. I know where I want to take them at the end of 6 weeks. I know where I want to meet them, and they're all going to have some common starting point. Then I can figure out 2, 3, 4, 5 in between, just sort of like logically, like what would it take a week at a time, right? If we're going to do 90 days, it'd be 2 weeks at a time in that example. So there's nothing magical about the number of steps. I'd say typically 4 would be a good minimum. 7, I'd say, would be a good maximum. You're going to see a lot of great frameworks that are 5 to 7 steps. That's sort of the sweet spot. And it also works really well, again, for a coaching experience that, you want to have some time with the client. If you develop a framework, or you already have a framework and you want to jump to group coaching, that is top of mind since I just went through this whole training exercise, my huge recommendation to you would be use the framework with some one-on-one clients first. Because so if you've been doing a bunch of one-on-one work and it's been sort of custom and a little bit ethereal, right? Like it's not like it's super defined, make it defined and then work with 3 more one-on-one clients. And then you'll figure out, is this the right order? Is it the right sort of like amount of information at each step? Does this make sense to the client? Does the name and description of each step make sense? Once you've got that sort of proof that, hey, this is working well, then you're, really, really ready for a group coaching program. There's a lot more to an effective group coaching program. That's why it took 5 hours to teach it. But this is, I would say, the core thing. And even if you don't want to do group coaching, I highly recommend you should still have a signature framework. So how do you create it? Again, you sort of take your knowledge and your experience and your client work, the processes that you like to follow. You want to put them into a logical sequential order. Spend all of your time basically figuring out the first step and the last step, as I've described. Where do they want to start, or where do you want to start with them, and where do you want to lead them? Again, I'll reiterate, the first step is typically all about creating clarity or building initial momentum. The last step is, this is really important because people get hung up on this. The last step does not have to be fully completed in order for you to have done your job, right? So if you're working with someone for 90 days, in my case, the last step is profit, right? So at the end of 90 days, you are making much more profit. I'll just use a really specific example. For the Podcast Profits Accelerator, if you're qualified for our program and you're meeting at the right step one, right? If we spend 90 days with you and you do the work, you will have generated at least $10,000 in new profit, right? So that is true. Our promise of our program is that you will generate at least 6 figures in new profit each year, right? Well, I'm only working with you for 90 days, so I can't generate 6 figures in 90 days because we need the full year. The whole idea is that you come, we get initial success, we've got all the systems, and you've got a playbook, and you're doing it. And as you continue to do it beyond 90 days, you will inevitably hit success. But the key here is you can only work with someone for a limited amount of time. So your last step does not encumber you or require you to complete it. I hope that makes sense. So the last step is not typically a full transformation, but it is a plan for inevitable success. So short way of saying that is when they get to the end, then they've done that last step. Now they have a plan to get ultimate success, right? Profit in their business, in my case, or build wealth and give generously in the Dave Ramsey case. You're not done with that when you're in financial peace. And in financial peace, you likely won't even get there, right? But you have a plan for it. And after I leave this program, I know exactly what I need to do now to achieve that ultimate goal. And in that case, it's sort of a lifelong endeavor. So I hope that makes sense for like that first and last step. Now you want to break your full transformation from first to last step into some key phases. That's the middle part. Again, another 2 to 4 to 5 steps in there. That's where you'll have nice, clean structure and flow. So everything I've said so far is really about writing down a process for each of the steps that you want to take with your clients. You can just do that, and that's fine. The way to really make this nameable and claimable and like intellectual property that you want to write a book or give speeches about is you actually want to name it, right? And so it's best if your framework has a name, right? The 7 Baby Steps. Super simple name, but it's a name. The 5P framework. It's actually the 5 Ps of profitable podcast guesting, but everyone just calls it the 5 Ps. That works, right? And you can use an acronym with the letters. You can be on a metaphor. It can spell out a verb, like an action word, right? Or alliteration, like the 5 Ps: purpose, plan, pitch, perform, profit. They don't make any cool like acronym, but they are memorable and they are referenceable because they do have alliteration. So hopefully that makes sense. So here's my thing. AI is a great tool, and I wouldn't use AI as like create a framework for me. You know what I mean? Like you can do that as for some ideation, but what I would do is after you've defined the steps in your process, feed that into AI and say, give me a clever name. So AI is not so good at the clear part. Like you need to give clear steps in your framework. AI is very good at clever. So if you say, here's the process I use for my clients, help me come up with some unique names, it'll give you a bunch of names, right? And if you give it a little context, it'll give you names that are pertinent to you in your industry. So as a demonstration, the final thing I'll share here, I was preparing for this workshop, for this group coaching VIP day, as we called it. And I was going to be talking about the importance of having a framework. and I didn't have a framework. And so I created one for this process that I went through with everyone, right? And so we called it the scale framework. Spoiler alert, I came up with the steps, and then ChatGPT gave me scale and put the words in a order that created a cool acronym, because we're talking about scaling a business, the scale framework. And so in our case, scale is set your offer. That's the S, right? Craft your framework, activate your launch plan, leverage your first wins, and expand your reach. Are those super meaningful phrases? Not necessarily on their own, but as I explained them in the workshop, they totally made sense. Like, set your offer is like creating the base of your coaching offer and the transformation you provide your clients. Pricing, naming, duration, all that kind of stuff. Craft your framework is basically what I just covered. Activate your launch plan was how to fill your first group coaching program. So activation of a launch, right? So it's kind of a cool way to think about it. Leverage your first wins. So that's like, hey, I did one group. How do I use that group and leverage it to continue to sell out group coaching programs? Because that's really important. And then expand your reach is really the scaling part of this. It's sort of that ongoing thing we want to continue to do. We want to have exponential expansion of our impact and our income. And so that was the final letter in our framework. So the scale framework is a linear framework that I just used. And in 5 hours, I helped dozens of people create an offer, craft their framework, activate their launch plan. And then we talked about how they can leverage the early momentum of the program and expand their reach. So I completed that in 5 hours and went through an entire signature framework. This framework could be a keynote, probably will be, could be an entire group coaching program, could be the basis of a mastermind. It could be the basis of a 90-day accelerator. I could write a book about it, right? That's the power of a framework. So I hope that this has been useful and insightful. And I think now, as you go out into the world, into the just normal day-to-day world, but especially when you're online and you're looking at different content that's out there and different programs and different books and all that, I think you'll start to see the world in frameworks. And I think what you'll appreciate is frameworks are really useful and really helpful. And I hope that you're inspired to create your own. So I'm Dustin Riekman. Again, love that I got to come on here and share a deep dive solo episode on this really critical topic of creating a signature framework. If you would like to work with us to create your framework and put it into a group coaching program and sell it through podcast guesting, that's what we do. So feel free to go to sevenfigureleap.com/call, or just go to sevenfigureleap.com and click all the buttons. They all go to the same place. That will allow you to book a call with us, and we can talk about if you'd be a good fit for the Podcast Profits Accelerator, which again is using podcast guesting as the vehicle to create and launch a successful business of any type, but in particular, a group coaching program is one of the things I really love to help people do. So appreciate you. I will catch you on the next episode. In the meantime, send me a message, hit me up. Let me know what resonated here. If you've got a framework in mind, share it with me. I'd love to see it, celebrate it, share it, and give you feedback on it.